Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Optimality Insights podcast, where we dive into practical strategies for getting the most out of your digital execution environment. I'm Callie Collins, and today we're going to be talking about something that every new organization setting up an Optimality needs to figure out: how to structure your instance the right way from the start. This is one of the most important parts of implementation. It affects not only how clean and organized your data is, but also how scalable your setup becomes as you grow, bring on more endeavors and users, and collaborate across teams or even across companies. So in this episode, I'm going to walk through 5 key areas: organizations, endeavors, teams and subteams, master data, and standard processes. By the end, you'll have a framework for how to think through each of these decisions and a few practical best practices that can help you save a lot of cleanup down the road. Let's start at the top level: organizations. In Optimality, your organization represents your overall tenant, the highest level of configuration in the system. Everything inside that organization shares the same standard process library, standard master data, and the same user base, although you can customize permissions at the endeavor level. Now, one question I get asked is, when should I use one organization versus multiple? And here's the key: it's perfectly fine and often encouraged to have multiple companies, partners, or joint ventures all working within the same organization. Optimality gives you the ability to control permissions across endeavors, meaning you can still keep sensitive data separate and control exactly who has access to what. The reason you'd want to split into multiple organizations or multiple tenants is when you have truly separate companies or user groups that require unique permissions and user access models, have entirely different master data or standard process libraries, and won't need to share reporting or visibility across endeavors. Because right now, separate organizations in Optimality are completely siloed, there is no linking between tenants. So if you have 2 companies with distinct standards, user bases, and data models, that's when it makes sense to create separate organizations. Within your organization, the next layer is your endeavors, and these represent the actual initiatives, projects, or portfolios of work. Each endeavor has its own list of activities, tasks, teams, and associated content. It can also share the same org-level master data and standard processes as the rest of the organization. A good rule of thumb for deciding when to create a new endeavor is this: if you're working on something that needs its own team structure, needs its own commitment planning cycles, or requires its own master data values, then it's probably a separate endeavor. On the other hand, if you're just breaking work into phases or sub-projects, but everyone's using the same core data, the same teams, and you want to be able to see unified reporting, it's usually better to keep that under a single endeavor. Right now, endeavors don't have cross-linking between their activities. So if you need dependency management or constraints between projects, those have to exist within one endeavor. However, reporting can go across multiple endeavors, so you can still roll up metrics across your entire portfolio. One practical limitation to keep in mind: endeavors are designed to handle a large but finite number of activities. So if your project scope starts to push those limits, or if you find your teams and data getting unwieldy, it's a good indicator that it's time to break things out into multiple endeavors. As an example, if you're wanting to manage the planning of an upcoming portfolio of projects, where each will have a small number of high-level activities during the planning stage, and there may or may not be multiple relationships between them, it might make sense to manage them in a single endeavor. Once these projects decide to use Optimality for a detailed level of execution management, they'll likely want to split off into their own endeavors. Next, let's talk about teams. one of the most important drivers of both workflow and permissions in Optimality. You can think of a team as the main group of people working together towards shared goals within an endeavor. Every activity, task, or content item can be tagged to a team, and that determines both visibility and responsibility. Now, you can have a single team for a whole endeavor, or you can choose to divide it into subteams. Here's why you might want to use subteams. Teams drive commitment planning, meaning each team has its own commitment plan per time period. So if you want everyone to participate in one unified plan, keep it as a single team. But if you want multiple groups running separate plans, for example, engineering, procurement, and construction, you'll want to create subteams. Teams and subteams also control access rights. Members of a team can make updates or adjustments to activities, tasks, and content tagged to their own teams, while others can have read-only or restricted views. And finally, in the activity flow diagram, teams can be visualized as swim lanes, which makes it easy to see how work is divided and coordinated across functions. All right, now let's talk about master data, which is one of the most powerful and sometimes overlooked pieces of the Optimality setup. Master data defines the controlled vocabularies and dropdowns used across your instance. Things like deliverables, activity types, categories, disciplines, work package types, and so on. The best practice here is to always start from your organization standard master data whenever possible. Why? Because your standard master data is tied directly to your standard process library. So when you bring in a standard process, all the master data connections come with it automatically. This makes everything more consistent, traceable, and easier to manage across endeavors. That said, sometimes you'll have endeavor-specific master data. For example, a project might associate activities to a specific geographical area within the plot plan of the project, or associate with equipment tags, or require other custom classifications. In this case, you can define endeavor-level master data and tag it to specific activities before bringing in your standard process. That way, when you import that process, all the master data for that project is automatically applied and correctly aligned. This avoids messy rework later, and it keeps your lineage clear between what's standardized and what's been tailored for that specific endeavor. And finally, let's talk about standard processes, one of the biggest levers for repeatability and continuous improvement. If you know you'll be doing the same series of activities repeatedly, either within a single endeavor or across multiple endeavors, the best practice is to create a standard process and then import it into each endeavor. Doing this keeps lineage, meaning you can see exactly where each activity or task came from, how many times that standard process has been used, and how it's evolved over time. If you just copy and paste activities within your endeavor, you lose that connection. There's no visibility into how your standard processes are performing or changing across projects. So by using the standard process library, you're not only making setup faster and cleaner, but you're also building a data-driven foundation for process improvement. So to recap, here's a quick checklist for structuring your Optimality instance. Use one organization unless you truly need separate tenants with their own standards, users, and permissions. Create endeavors for distinct projects or portfolios that need separate master data or team structures. Organize teams and subteams around commitment planning cycles and access boundaries. Keep master data standardized whenever possible and extend it only when necessary. And use standard processes to maintain lineage, accelerate setup, and measure process adoption across your organization. When you get these foundations right, everything else in Optimality, from analytics to automation, just works more smoothly. Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with this. Setting up your Optimality instance the right way from the start makes everything that comes after so much easier. But you don't have to figure it out all alone. If you ever run into questions while structuring your organization, setting up endeavors, or configuring teams and master data, our team is always here to help. You can reach out to us directly and we'll walk through the setup with you, whether that's a quick conversation or a deeper consulting engagement. We'll make sure your structure is aligned with your goals, scalable for the future, and taking full advantage of what Optimality can do. Our goal is to make sure you're successful, not just in getting up and running, but in building a system that truly supports the way that your organization works. So if you need a hand, reach out. We're here and we're invested in helping you make the best of your instance and your team so that you can perform at your best. Until next time, this is Callie with Optimality Insights, helping you work smarter, align faster, and optimize with purpose.